Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.
He's written so many books and had so much impact around our world. It's a pleasure to have on the program today Philip Yancey, and especially with his recent diagnosis of Parkinson's disease and his willingness to talk about that in light of some of the things he's written and in light of a God who he believes is good and faithful. Really looking forward to hearing these conversations, hearing his answers to some of these sorts of questions that we want to put to Philip. Just before we get into that, would you like, rate, review, share this with friends, follow the program as well. Helps us get it out to more and more people. Let's chat with Philip Yancey. Joining me today, a gentleman who has had such an impact around the world with the host of his various books, not least of which, What's So Amazing About Grace. There's a whole heap of others that I'm sure we will mention as we go through this as well. It's an absolute privilege to welcome to the program Philip Yancey. How are you, Philip?
I'm doing very well, and it's great to talk with someone in Australia, one of my favorite places. I think I've been there about 4 times, but boy, that's a long plane trip down there.
It sure is. Just think about us. For us to go anywhere, Philip, it's a long plane trip. So that's how
well, you're right. You're absolutely right.
Yes, it's probably why we
But this year you've had the whole Women's World Cup, so
That's
the world's been looking at you.
We sure have indeed. It's been wonderful having that and the excitement of all of what that was as well, which is wonderful. Philip, it is wonderful to have a conversation with you, and we want to talk about a host of various things, not least of which is a recent diagnosis for yourself of Parkinson's disease, and you've been very open about and willing about sharing about that. So I do want to make sure we talk through that. But before we do, maybe for somebody who's gone, oh, okay, well, I've never actually heard of Philip. How do you describe what you do in life and the way that you live your life?
I describe it as a journalist. I actually started in magazines, and a lot of books are written by experts, people who are professors, or if they're writing about religion, maybe they're a pastor or a theologian. And I write about some of those questions, but from a different perspective. I'm an inquiring journalist, and a journalist dives into areas he has no business doing, but that's what we're supposed to do. We go to the experts, we try to find some content that makes sense to us, and we kind of go hand in hand with the reader into these thickets of trying to understand some of the big questions of life. So I'm just a pilgrim. I'm an ordinary person who struggles with questions like why did I just get Parkinson's disease? Why is there so much suffering in the world? Some of those questions keep coming up, and I feel free to dive in and try to come up with some answers that might help.
I can't remember the exact quote, but I was reading somewhere around, essentially a paraphrase of what you talked about was this: I can't quite believe that I get to just keep asking these questions, and this gets to be sort of the job that I'm doing as I write books, and I'm being this inquisitive. I'm just trying to be honest about how I'm viewing the world, and that seems to help people. I'm guessing you've had a whole lot of people all around the world contact you and say thank you for opening my eyes to this or allowing me to question this. Do you get lots of comments coming back to you?
I do, and one time I had this image of myself just below us in the United States. There's that thin area of land called Central America. In some places it's not very far between the Atlantic and the Pacific Ocean. And I think of myself as a jungle explorer. I'm in the middle of a jungle. I have no idea where I'm going, how I'm going to get to the other side, but I know the Atlantic Ocean is out there somewhere. And so I've got my machete and I'm chopping away. And finally, at last, in front of me, I found my goal, the Atlantic Ocean. And then I look behind me, and I see a long line of people, and they say, "Thank you for clearing the way." We were trying to find the Atlantic Ocean too, and I feel that way when I jump into these questions. Like moderately recently, I wrote a book called "Prayer Doesn't Make Any Difference," and that's a question that we all ask at some point: Are these words just bouncing off the wall, or does it really matter? Do we have any actual responses to our prayers? And I can go to people and come up with some ideas that work for me, that make sense to me, and if anybody else is following along, more power to them.
It's interesting you mentioned that book. I was going to bring it up at one point in our conversation too, Philip, that that book for my wife and I, in an interesting way here, this story is more around us just in the struggle. We had a gentleman in his 40s who died very suddenly. The church had got around and prayed and was very much expecting him to be healed, and he was gone within a few days, really. And we struggled with, does prayer actually make a difference, for a long time? And we sort of read into that book, and I got to say, it wasn't like we got all our answers right then and there, but to know that there was a book that we could go to and we say, all right, let's sort of struggle with this together, and we just kept struggling for a while, and it's taken us, I think, probably a number of years to get further along that journey of, actually prayer's more than just request and then it got answered or not. It's a relationship, it's communication, it's all these various things. But I know whenever I think of that book of yours, I think of that time for us of going through that, and it must be special to have moments like that for people to, exactly, someone's cleared the way in front of us, and that, if it's helped them a little bit, that's awesome.
Yeah, and actually, the most recent book I wrote was a memoir called Where the Light Fell. And my life, when you read that story, my life started with that very question. Even before I was conscious of my life, I was only 13 months old, so barely a year old, when my father died. And the reason he died, he got polio, which was the great pandemic back in 1950. And he was only 23. Planning to be a missionary, and then he was overnight completely paralyzed, couldn't even breathe on his own. So for 2 months he spent in this iron lung, the metal contraption that polio patients would lie in, and it would actually force the air in and out of their lungs. And he couldn't move. He couldn't move his head. He couldn't move anything. People had to come, and they had little portholes with rubber gloves, and they would stick the gloves in and change him and feed him and do whatever was necessary to keep him alive. There wasn't much of a life, and a group of Christians decided that he would be healed. And so they all got together and prayed, and as a result, they removed him against medical advice from that iron lung and from that hospital. And it looked for a few days that he may have some improvement, but then a few days later, he died. And as I say, I was only 13 months old, so I have no memory of him at all. But that pretty well determined a lot of my childhood. My mother was now a widow, unequipped. She had never written a check. She had never driven a car. She was assuming that she was going to have a husband, and she had no income, no money. And so we lived in poverty, and eventually that dilemma took its toll on her in a very unhealthy way, which she took out on the family. That I had a fairly fractured childhood in a lot of ways, and it all traces back to a misunderstanding. Yeah. And I learned early on that not everybody who claims to speak for God does so. These people weren't against my father, they were for him, but they believed that God was going to heal him, and in this case, they were tragically wrong.
Yeah. As you mentioned, this is sort of part of what your journey is, even though you weren't conscious of it at the time. But the ramifications of decisions like that, the ramifications of certain belief systems and these sorts of things have had that impact. Why for you, Philip, for somebody perhaps who doesn't know much of your story, that you actually sort of took all of that experience and say, okay, well, pretty much every book I'm going to write, every musing I'm going to do, every inquisitive area I'm going to be is going to be something about God. You could have, I suppose, just as easily gone the other way and said there certainly isn't a God if this is all of the case, and I'm going to make sure I'm talking about the opposite part of it. Why for you is there something in there that is driving you towards God rather than away?
One factor in that is that I had a brother who was 2 years older, and he did go that opposite direction. He was extremely talented musically, had perfect pitch and pretty much perfect musical memory. So if he heard something on the radio or playing live, a month later he could sit down and play it. It was astonishing to watch as his brother, because I worked hard and never had trouble memorizing Song of the Volga Boatman, you know. But when he went to college, he went to musical conservatory, and this was the 1960s. People wanted to be free. They didn't want people to tell him what to do, and so he dropped out of school his final semester out of the Conservatory of Music. He became one of Atlanta, Georgia, where we lived, one of their original hippies. Took a lot of LSD, kind of fried his brain on drugs, and had a pretty sad saga after that, including several suicide attempts and a lot of broken relationships. There were only 3 of us in the family, so my mother was a widow and then 2 boys. And my mother and brother did not see each other or speak for more than 50 years, just at the very end of her life. She died just this year. They did have some contact. Watching him over the years, in a sense, he was searching for freedom, but he became a kind of slave to alcohol, to drugs, to sex, and he had a history of broken relationships and suicide attempts. So I saw where he really had no basis of making judgments on right and wrong. He just did whatever felt good, and it didn't turn out very well. So that became a kind of a cautionary tale for me. And at the same time, as a journalist, as I interviewed people, I found that the ones that most impressed me were the ones who did integrate their faith with their life. At a time when I was still trying to figure out, did I want to believe? Did I want to be part of this Christian group at all? I got connected with a man named Dr. Paul Brand, who was a leprosy specialist. And here was a brilliant man. He was asked to be head of orthopedics at Oxford University and at Stanford University, turned them both down, and instead spent his life among the lowest social class on earth. I can't imagine anyone lower than people in India who were in the lowest caste, then called the untouchables, who had leprosy. They were kicked out of their homes. They had to live outdoors at maybe a pile of rocks, and somebody would bring them a bucket of slop every now and then with something to eat in it. And Dr. Brand lived among them, worked among them, patched them back together, remade their hands and feet, invented all these creative surgeries to do that. And I've never been anyone more fully engaged with life. He's a scientist, so he knew every plant, every animal, every bird, and was just full of gratitude and joy for life. And as I was around people like that, and I started being attracted to people who were made larger and better because of their faith, and that's what they had in common. And I wanted that. And Jesus in one of the Gospels says that I came to give you more life. I came to give you abundant life. And a lot of people have the idea, I certainly did, that Christians don't really experience all of life. They're kept from doing things that everybody else enjoys. But the ones that I started following around are ones that were more alive, not less.
And we want to talk a bit more about that in that sense of what it means to live that full life, even in the midst of some very difficult things, including Philip's recent diagnosis of Parkinson's disease. We're going to talk about that next. Here on the program, my guest is Philip Yancey.
Share your brand, your event, your message.
Across 90 Christian radio stations and major cities in Australia and New Zealand.
By sponsoring Towards Understanding, hosted by Clayton Bielen.
More than 210,000 people tune into Towards Understanding each week. And with just one sponsorship, you'll reach this immense engaged audience. Find out more about this exciting and unique opportunity now
on the sponsorship page at positivemedia.com.au.
Philip Yancey, author of countless books, and as he's been sharing sharing himself, really a journalist, an inquisitive mind, understanding and asking those questions about God, about life generally. I think one of the quotes that I love from Philip is, he said, "My books are a process of exploration, an investigation of things I wonder about and worry about," which I think is quite refreshing. Often we find people wanting to try and write books that say, well, I've got all the answers, but certainly, Philip, it's wonderful that you're not trying to pretend that's the case. You're just your reflections and your investigations as you go. I did want to ask you, Philip, that you have written multiple books. Here's just three: Disappointment with God, Where is God When It Hurts, The Gift of Pain. I mentioned those three specifically because recently you have had a diagnosis of Parkinson's disease, and I would imagine that there's different parts of each of those books, even from just the titles, that came flooding back to you as you heard that. Could you first take us through the understanding of how you knew you had Parkinson's, and then I'd like to explore a bit more about how you're processing this when you've sort of talked about these sorts of ideas and things with many others over the years. But firstly, how did you understand you did have Parkinson's?
Interesting story, and it involves an Alfie. We've got some friends in Australia who come up here during your summer, our winter, and go skiing. They've done this several years in a row. He's a great skier, and we were skiing. It was a year ago, I guess, a year ago in February, so almost like 18 months now. And we like skiing bumps, and we like skiing trees. He's a wild guy, and I'm privileged enough to follow him. And I was following him and doing pretty well, I thought. And there was a tree in front of me, and I gave orders to my legs to turn right. And they disobeyed, and I smashed into this tree. Fortunately, I wasn't hurt that badly, but I couldn't ski for a number of weeks after that. And that was just such an odd sensation because I knew I had given the right orders. My brain said, turn, and my legs didn't respond. A few other things like that happened, and I went to my primary care doctor and they described it and said, "Do you think I might have Parkinson's disease?" And he said, "Oh no, Philip, you're in great shape. You don't have Parkinson's disease." So I put it behind me, and that was a mistake because gradually, I just started slowing down. It took me longer to get dressed, and my steps became a little more shuffling, and finally, after about 8 months, I decided I need to go to an expert. And finally, after waiting a few more months to get an appointment, I saw a neurologist. They did a number of tests. And just this February of 2023 said, "Philip, you have Parkinson's disease." It hasn't really manifested itself in a serious way yet. I responded well to the medication. There's a good medication for Parkinson's, and it's a degenerative disease, so it gets worse over time. And we've all known Parkinson's patients who are in pretty bad shape. Certainly when I go to groups, I see them, and that may be ahead of me. I don't know. But right now, it's quite manageable with the medication, and I have to make adjustments, adaptations, which is kind of a preview of what we all do. I am 73 years old, and even though I'm very active, I do all sorts of outdoor sports here in the state of Colorado. But when you're 73, you make changes. I don't ride the same mountain bike courses that I did 10 years ago. And aging involves those adaptations of letting go. And we all do it. We have to do it. We can't do things at 70 that we could do at 60 or 50. But Parkinson's can speed up that process. And of course, going to the hospital on a regular basis for checkups, I see people with much more serious neurological diseases. The disease we call ALS and muscular dystrophy and multiple sclerosis, and it's there's a sword hanging over my head. There's no doubt about it, and I'm trying to learn from it. And I'm trying to put into practice some of the things I've written over the years.
What are some of those things that you are deliberately going back to that you've written, that you've as you've talked to others, as you've done this? And I know part of the process you've been pretty open about sharing. I didn't want to be labelled Philip with Parkinson's, but you understand there's going to be aspects of all that sort of stuff. So what are some of the things that you've actually even written or been a part of that you're now reminding yourself of?
As a journalist, to my surprise, I found that some of the people that impressed me most were people who had very difficult lives. And surveys show that when you ask people, at what point in your life did you grow the most, either psychically, psychologically, or spiritually especially, about 80% of the people who answer talk about a tough time. It may not involve physical pain. It may be a time when you're in graduate school and you have no money and you eat baked beans out of a can 6 days in a row, something like that. Or a time when maybe you have a child who has an illness and you pull together as a family because you're facing this dire situation and you need help. And I found, as I interviewed and got to know people who had been through suffering, in some cases almost defined by suffering, that they had a depth and a wisdom and a resilience that people who spend their lives enjoying pleasure and success don't have. In fact, I came up with this principle. We all have a whole different set of gifts and struggles, and life is not fair. Some people have a lot more struggles than I do. Some people have a lot less. Some people have a lot more success than I do. Some people have a lot less. But I found among the people I got to know as a journalist, people are better stewards of failure and suffering than those people who are stewards of success and prosperity. It's a funny thing because here in America and Australia is somewhat similar, I think. That's the celebrity culture, and we emulate famous people, and everybody wants to be rich. But as I got to know some of these very successful rich people, I don't envy their lives. Actually, I don't want to be one of them. And I really learned from people who faced struggles and yet saw it through to the other side. I came up with a phrase that it's almost a mantra for me, Clayton. It goes like this: that pain redeemed impresses me more than pain removed. Pain redeemed. That people who go through a hard time and actually go through it and learn from it and don't become bitter, but use it in a positive way, impress me much more than those who just get it taken away right away. And we live in a kind of pain-aversive society, so we're always trying to find a faster drug to stop pain, But when you look at history, when some of the greatest thinkers didn't have those advantages, they didn't have those drugs, modern drugs that we have, and yet they're the ones who came up with a kind of wisdom of life that we all need at one time or another. And I want to learn that wisdom. I just next week, as we're talking here, I'm going to be speaking at a camp for post-polio survivors. I agreed, just a small group at an outdoor camp, and I agreed to do that, of course, with my history of my father dying of polio. They were children when they got it. Polio mostly attacked children, and so they were 4 or 5 years old back in 1950, but of course they're in their 70s now. And I know what I'll find because I've been around people like that. I'll find that, yes, we have stories of being bullied and just the sadness of growing up with crutches and braces on their legs and all that. But I'm going to learn from these people. They will come away with a toughness and a sense of gratitude for life that puts some of the hedonists to shame, frankly. Yeah. And it's just an observation that I have seen again and again as a journalist and the people I've gotten to know.
With that sort of framework, as you think about that, and there's such beautiful, scribbling down those quotes as well, that pain redeemed inspires more than pain removed. For you personally, as you thinking about what Parkinson's means for you, do you look into the future? Is there any aspect that you are actually afraid, Philip, or is it more a sort of, you're looking through, trying to see where the depth and that growth would come, or is there a bit of both in that?
It was a shock when I got the diagnosis, for sure, because I am a very active person, and I had this image of what Parkinson's could look like in its extreme form, and that may happen. It's not going to happen right away. It's going to be a gradual thing, and I will have to change my focus, I'm sure, and I like to be independent. I don't like to rely on other people. I don't like to feel helpless, but I'm going to face those things at some point, and I need to plan for it. We may at some point start looking for what we call an assisted living facility here, where you can get outside help. Probably not going to be living in the mountains like we are now. Our lives are going to change. We do not have children. My wife and I don't, so that's a complication too. It's not like there are people in their 50s who are looking out for us and will be available. So we have to, I wouldn't say fear. I don't fear it, but I'm aware that it takes adjustments, and I can either be whiny and bitter about it, or try to learn from it and pass on that wisdom that I will learn through the suffering, pass it on in a helpful way to others.
Yeah. I know my grandfather had Parkinson's, and it was certainly a number of years ago now that he passed, and the medications improved and all those sorts of things. But the lasting memory I have is of his determination, but also my grandmother's determination in caring too. There was a remarkable sense of love and care that occurred around when for him it was getting very much more difficult, even to the point that the local doctors said, look, if she was in her 70s, and said, if you were 20 years younger, I'd be hiring you to come and work in the practice as a carer, because there is something so special of what it is to have people around too. I did want to ask just another question around this too, Philip, is that you could have very easily said, actually, you know what? People aren't going to really notice anything about that for a number of years, maybe even for ages. I'm not really going to share this part of my life right now, and that's fair enough. And maybe you and your wife and others around you, they would know, but that's about all it was. Why choose the vulnerability of, even, you're talking to someone on the other side of the world and talking about this when it's still a pretty fresh diagnosis of 6 months or so? What was there a moment that you ever thought, actually, I might just keep this to us, or were you always going to share that, and why?
That's a great question. And I wrote a lengthy article that you've quoted within weeks of the diagnosis. And I think my instinct, as I've been writing for 50 years, my instinct is when something happens, when I have an experience that is important, the way I metabolize it, the way I make sense of it, is by writing. I first do it for myself, to try to come to terms with it, and then what can I learn from it? And then at some point I think, well, is there something that might be helpful to someone else? And I have received letters. I got a lot of response, and I received letters from a number of people who said, I have Parkinson's, and I hid it for 10 years. And thank you for being open. It takes some of the shame away, and it gives me a chance to authentically face what I need to do in this new reality. And I guess that's what I hope to do as a writer. I've always tried to be honest and authentic about my doubts, about my struggles, as well as the good things about the faith that is very important to me. And because I've written about suffering so much, in a sense, it gives me a credibility that I didn't have before, because I've joined that company of people who take pills every day and look at, must monitor their health in ways that, quote, normal people don't have to.
This is not a well-formed question, Philip, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I wasn't going to, but I'm going to now. Is Is there a part of you that sort of goes, oh, did God do a bit of a bait and switch on me here? Like, here I am writing about all this suffering for all these years, and he knew that this was going to come up, and here I am. Like, has there been an aspect of thinking like that at all?
That's a great one. I wouldn't put it like that. Because I've been around people with, well, like these leprosy patients, for example, what I go through, no matter what course it takes, is nothing like the humiliation that they face. A leprosy patient in the lower caste in India, where they're just rejected by society and treated like dirt. I'm not going to face it. I can go to doctors, I can get medication, and I'll face some challenges for sure and a lot of adjustments. But because I've spent so much time with suffering people, and especially 10 years of my life I devoted to writing books with Dr. Paul Brand, the leprosy specialist. So I've had a wonderful life. I've traveled around the world. I've been very active. I've had excellent health. And I can't complain. No, I'm not like Job. The rug hasn't been pulled out from under me. It was just a new twist in the journey. And the fact is, everybody faces pain at some point, and everybody dies at some point. And historically, people prepared for that. You've seen the paintings of the medieval theologians who would have a skull sitting on their desk to remind them every day, life is short, you're going to end up like this one day. And, we kind of bury that and try not to think about it. But it's the most universal thing that happens. 100% of people die. I don't care who you are, how smart you are, how pious you are going to die. And so living life in the face of reality, not in denial, not burnishing the truth, but just being honest and facing into it and preparing, I think it's an important lesson that we all need to do, and that's what I plan to do.
Yeah. Philip, I've got one final question, and we're not even going to get to the recent article you put out around the time you met Bono and U2, and people just have to read that up on your website themselves. I was thinking that, but that's what they'll have to do. I did want to ask this question. There's many people listening around the country on radio at the moment, maybe those who'll be listening later on a podcast as well, who may not have an understanding of Jesus or a faith that you do, but are sitting there and saying, well, I understand the pain, and I understand that there seems to be something more to all of this. And as Philip's talking about this, it sort of seems to make sense too, that there's something else beyond what this is. If someone's in that situation right now, what would be your encouragement of what maybe should they think, or what should they do as they start saying, look, I don't want to just sit in this, there might be something. I want to start asking. I want to start knowing what those next things might be.
Yeah, I'm a Christian, and for me, you can't do any better than look straight at Jesus. In a lot of ways, the church can get in the way of our proper understanding of God. The church I grew up in certainly did. I came away from that church with the image of God as this kind of cosmic policeman in the sky, frowning, trying to keep everybody from having a good time. And it took me a long time to recover from that toxic image. I wrote a book, one of my books is called The Jesus I Never Knew, and it's about that very process, because I didn't know the real Jesus. But anybody, you can find a Bible pretty easily in a country like Australia. Just read the Gospels for yourself. Start with one of the simplest ones, the Gospel of Mark, and just watch this Jesus, who we believe was sent as the Son of God to show us what God is like and what we should be like. And just watch how he responds to people, suffering people, angry people, rich people, poor people. And he's full of surprises, he's full of creativity, and he's worth getting to know, he's worth following. And I know that the church can get in the way, and I could tell you stories that probably top whatever church stories you can come up with, because I grew up in a pretty bad one in the fundamentalist racist South. And I know a lot of people have been wounded by the church because the church is made up of flawed human beings, just like you and me. And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we don't. But for anyone who's really seeking, I would say, start by just taking a look at Jesus, because he changed. Here's a guy who changed history more than anybody. It's inarguable. I don't care if you're an atheist. Our calendars date from Jesus' life, and if you look back at the Roman Empire and what was going on and what happened in the next few centuries, it all traces back to Jesus, this man, who was only active working maybe 3 or 4 years. That's all. But he had that power, he had that charisma, and he had that genius, and just a spiritual power that he brought to the world that has never stopped changing lives around the world.
And certainly did, as you said, knew that pain and death and suffering and grace and love all mixed in as part of what we've been talking about too. Philip, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being willing to be so open and honest. Thank you for your writings and the impact of them. And we just are so privileged to have had a bit of time chatting with you today. Thank you so much, Philip Yancey.
Well, it's been a pleasure. And my last word of advice is be careful when you ski with an Aussie. And I hope to get back to your country one more time at least someday.
My guest on Towards Understanding, author Philip Yancey.
Let's take a short break with a homegrown uplifting track. This is Be Who You Wanna Be from Newcastle band Never Say Never Music.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. This is for the hustle.
Be who you wanna be.
This is for the struggle. Come on, use that muscle.
Check out Be Who You Wanna Be and more from Never Say Never Music on your favourite streaming platform, or visit neversaynevermusic.com.
Bring it back.